In this video, we're going to set up a lab using VMware Workstation 15 Player and Windows Server 2016 as our server. And we're going to set up two of those, and we're going to set up one Windows 10 client and join it to the new domain we'll create. So let's start by clicking on Create a New Virtual Machine. We're going to create three of these. And we're going to use the ISO files that we've downloaded from Microsoft. So you can see there's the 2016, and then we also have an ISO of Windows 10. So let's click on the installer disk image ISO, and we'll browse to our desktop. There's our ISOs, and we'll do our Windows Server first. And we'll put in our key. We'll decide what version of Windows. In this case, we're going to go with the standard version. And we'll put in our password. And you can put in whatever password you want, but I'm going to use password with a capital P and a 0, which does meet the minimum requirements. And we'll click Next, and we'll give the machine name. I'm going to call this DC01. It's going to be our first domain controller. And we can also put in the location if we want to choose a different location. I'm going to go ahead and click Browse, and in this particular case, I'll choose the C drive, create a new folder, and we'll just go ahead and call this VMs. There we go. Next. And now we want to give it a size. I'll just leave it at the default 60 gigabytes, but you can do whatever it is that you want. It really only needs 32 gigs for the minimum, but just to be on the safe side, you can go bigger if you have the space. You can also split the files into multiple files, or you can keep the virtual disk as a single file, which I'm going to do in this case. It's a little bit easier to find that way and move it if you need to. Click Next. We don't need to customize any hardware, and we'll go ahead and click Finish, and then the VM will automatically start. And we can see it's starting. We'll hit any key to boot from Windows. And it's going to go into our setup screen, and we'll go ahead and go through all the motions of creating our first domain controller. Go ahead and click the middle button, and we can expand it for the entire screen size, and we can scroll down a little bit so that way we can make sure we can get to all of the buttons to click Next. And we can see that Windows is installing. And when it's all done, we'll get our login screen, and from there we can log into Windows and get started with our Active Directory setup. Our DC01 has completed installation and it's booting up for the first time. Let's go ahead and create our second, and also going to be a domain controller. And we'll call this one DC02 for domain controller number 2. And we'll browse to our location once again. And we'll click OK. You do get a warning about having two VMs in the same location. You can create another folder if you want just to split those up. Let's go ahead and click Continue, choose the default once again, and we'll store the virtual disks as a single file. Click Next and Finish. And the installation will begin as soon as it boots up. Now you can do multiple installations at the same time if you have the hardware to support it. In this case, we're using RAID 5 15,000 RPM drives, or you could also get good speed out of an SSD drive as well. And we were successful getting our domain controller up and running, but we have yet to configure anything on that, so we'll go ahead and work on that. DC02 is still in the setup phase. Make sure you pick the standard version with the desktop experience when you are prompted. Otherwise, you'll end up getting a command prompt instead of a desktop, which is what you would expect. Now we'll go back and we'll get our Windows 10 installation going. We'll just double-click on our VMware once again and click to create a new virtual machine. And this time we're going to choose our Windows 10 instead of our 2016 ISO file. There we go. Next. I'm going to put in the same password once again, which is just password with a capital P and a 0 just for our lab environment. And we'll paste in our key and choose Next. We'll give our name client 01 or client 1, whatever it is you want to call it. And we'll browse once again to our ISO file, or our VM folder, I should say. And then we'll go ahead and choose that as our location. We'll click OK. Next. And we'll choose the default size again, using a single file. And that all looks good. We can see the default memory is 2 gigs. Click Finish. And I'll show you how to expand the memory and the processors after we finish getting the installations done. We are in our Server Manager on DC01. Let's go ahead and click on Add Roles and Features. And we'll get a new wizard that pops up that allows us to install our Active Directory components. So let's go ahead and click Next. And let's take a look and stop right here. We see right now that our Windows Server name is not what we want it to be. So even though we called it DC01 in VMware, we did not rename it in Windows. We also want to change the IP address as well, because this is the IP address given to us automatically using the DHCP server built in. So let's go ahead and cancel this, and let's go set up our TCP IP addresses. We'll right-click, go to Open Network and Sharing Center, and we'll go in and change our IP information. Click the Change Adapter Settings, and we'll right-click, go to Properties, and we'll change our TCP IP4 settings. Double-click. And in this particular case, we're going to go with a 192.168.0 address. And we'll choose the default Class C subnet mask. And for our DNS, we're going to put the same address because this is going to be a DNS server. Now, we're not going to put in the default gateway because this is just a lab setup, so we do not need to go out to the internet. If you need to get any files from the internet, you can do it from the host and copy and paste it into the lab. So let's go ahead and click OK. Click OK. And now our computer has the right IP address. So what we want to do next is we want to go in and change the name of the computer itself. So we'll put in Control Panel, and we'll change that to large icons, makes it a little bit easier. And we'll go down to where it says System. This is all alphabetical, so it should be pretty easy to find. And we'll click on Change Settings. And then we'll click Change, and we'll call this DC01. And then we're going to need to restart the computer. So I'm going to click OK. And we'll click OK here, close. But instead of restarting, what we're going to do is we're going to shut the computer down, and we're going to add in some resources. So let's go ahead and shut down. The only way to make some of these changes is the computer itself has to be shut down. So our DC01 has been shut down. Let's go ahead and highlight DC01. And from here, we're going to go to the settings and make some changes. So we'll right-click on it, choose Settings. So here we see that we're using 2 gigabytes of RAM, we're using 2 processors, and we have the hard drive. So this really isn't enough to make our virtual machines run very well. So if we go down to our task manager on our host, we can see what kind of resources we have by clicking on Performance. And in this particular case, if we click on CPU, we can see we have 12 cores. Now this is because it's a Xeon processor. You might be using an i5 or an i7 or something similar to that, so you may not see quite as many as 12 cores, but that's okay. We also have under memory of 39 gigs. You really need at least 8 gigs to make this lab work, but you'd be much better off with at least 16. So let's go ahead and close that. Now, so knowing that we've got our memory set to 2 gigs, I'm going to go ahead and change this to around 6 gigs because we've got it. So we'll go ahead and do that. And let's go ahead and change our processors from 2, and we'll go ahead and go to 4. So now we'll go much faster. Now, if you have any kind of instability, you may need to go in and check some of these various different boxes, but you can do a little bit of research on your own if you do have your VMware crash on you to decide which boxes to check. So I'm not going to get into that for this particular video, but let's just go ahead, click OK, and just make sure that you're aware of that option. We'll go ahead and click the power on button for DC01, and we'll get that back up again and get our Active Directory installed. So when it comes back up, we're going to go and click on this little Control-Alt-Delete in order to get our login screen to come up. Put in our password, and we'll log in. And you can see things are running much more quickly now compared to what they were, now that we've added more RAM and more processors to the mix. So in order to get our smooth mouse working and keyboard and everything like that, we've got to put in our guest additions. So we're going to go down to the from player 1 at the top left, click on Manage, and put in our virtual machine. And from here we'll click on Options, and let's go to where it says VMware Tools, and let's make sure that we have this set to update automatically. And we'll go ahead and click OK on that, so that way the tools go ahead and get installed whenever it's ready. Let's click on Add Roles and Features. And this is the area that we were in before, but we could not proceed because our IP address setting and our name wasn't correct. Go ahead and click Next. Now we'll choose the default role-based and click Next. And now this is looking the way we want it to be. It's DC01 as well as our correct IP address. We'll click Next. Let's go ahead and choose to install the Active Directory domain services and choose to add the features. And we'll click Next. And we don't need any features additional to that this time. Next and Install. And this usually takes anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 or 10 minutes, just depending on the speed of the host computer that you're running on. And the installation is complete. We'll go ahead and click Close. And now we see this little triangle at the top. We'll click on that, and we'll choose to promote this server to be a domain controller. So that'll pop up. We'll get a new wizard, and we're going to click to add a new forest. So we'll just call this widget llc.internal and click Next. We can see that the forest and domain are both going to be at 2016 because it's a 2016 server, and we'll leave the default boxes checked that you see there. And we're going to put in our password just in case Active Directory breaks. We need this Directory Services Restore mode in order to get into Windows if Active Directory does have a problem in the future. Go ahead and click Next. Just ignore that warning at the top. We don't have to worry about that. That always happens during installation. And it's going to create the default NetBIOS domain name, which is just going to be the shortened version of our domain name we created earlier, our fully qualified domain name we created earlier. And we'll click Next. And we'll choose the defaults that we see here. And we'll click Next. And then, as long as we don't get any red stop errors, all other messages are fine. We'll go ahead and click the Install button at the bottom. And all those look good. We'll go ahead and click Install. And it usually takes a few minutes to get this installed, and it will automatically restart when it's done. We're in DC02. Let's go ahead while we're waiting for DC01 to do its thing, and we'll go in and change the IP address of DC02, and we'll also change the name in the exact same way that we did DC01, but we're going to give this a different IP address. So this one has to be something different than the original one that we did. But we're going to point the DNS back to our DC01 server because we're going to need that to make our Active Directory installation go correct. All right, we'll click OK there. Now we'll go to Control Panel and we'll rename our computer to DC02. So we'll change this to large icons, go down to System, and we'll change that to DC02. We're also going to shut this down and add the same amount of resources that we did for DC01, and we're going to also allow the VMware tools to be installed and updated as well. So let's go ahead and go to Manage, Virtual Machine Settings, Options, VMware Tools, and we'll update automatically. And now we'll shut down. At this point, when you restart, if you get the option to download and install VMware Tools, just go ahead and download and install. And when it's all done, the server will boot up. DC01 has booted back up. Now you can see the difference between the old login and the new one. We now see the domain name /administrator instead of just administrator. So we want to make sure that we go ahead and log in that way, and which is going to be the default way. The local administrator has now disappeared because this is now a domain controller. If we go up to Tools in Server Manager, which opens up by default, we'll just go ahead and click on Active Directory Users and Computers. And we should be able to see that our Active Directory domain is up and running, which it is. There it is. We see our widget LLC, and we see all of our default folders and containers. Now we've switched over to DC02, where we're going to add this as a secondary domain controller. So we click on Add Roles and Features, and the procedure is going to be a little bit different. We'll go ahead and click Next and make sure that our domain controller name and IP address is correct, which it is. And we'll go ahead and click on the Active Directory Domain Services, just like we did last time. And we'll click Next, and we'll just keep clicking Next until we get to the installation, which it is right there. And we'll let it install, and then we'll get on to the promotion process. And we see the installation is complete. We'll click Close. Now we want to go to the triangle at the top, click on Promote this server to be a domain controller, just like we did last time, but here's where the procedure gets to be a little different. So we're going to choose the Add a Domain Controller to an Existing Forest option instead of adding a new forest. We'll click on Select for the domain. It'll prompt us for our username and password. All right, now take a look where it says domain. It says DC02. We don't want DC02 for our domain. That's the name of the computer, not the name of the domain. So we're going to put in widget LLC / for our domain. There we go. Click OK. And now we should see our forest. But sometimes this does not work. Sometimes we end up getting encountered a problem. So let's go ahead and do a little troubleshooting. We'll click Cancel. We're going to go down to a command prompt. We'll right-click on our Start button, go to Command Prompt. Sometimes your option will be PowerShell, just depends on what your host is running. And let's make sure that we can ping DC01. And we can, so that means that our network settings for VMware are fine. Now let's go ahead and see if we can ping DC01 by name. Make sure we put in the entire fully qualified domain name, and we can. Now let's make sure we can ping just the domain itself. And we can. So this is perfect. This means this should work just fine. So let's go ahead. Maybe it's just a timing thing. Let's go ahead and click where it says domain and manually type in widgetllc.internal, and we'll click Next. Now we see here that the wizard cannot access the list of domains. The error is the username and password is incorrect. So if you want, you can go ahead and click on Change and re-enter widgetllc /administrator as well as the password. Let's go ahead and click Next and see if we can get past this screen even without it. And we did. So that means that everything was fine. It turned out to be just a timing issue. Now, if yours does not work even after that, one of the things I'll recommend is you right-click on this little network icon in the lower right section, go to Open Network and Sharing Center, and you can just temporarily disable IP version 6. So we'll right-click, go to Properties, and we'll go to IP version 6, and we'll just uncheck it. Now, I don't recommend you do this on DC01. Just do it on DC02. And that's because sometimes the IP version 6 gets ahead of the IP version 4, and we didn't actually set up IP version 6, so it went to its default configuration. So sometimes that can cause a problem. So that is another way you can troubleshoot that. And you can also do that on the client as well if you can't join your client to the domain. So let's go ahead and put in password. And after you successfully join the server and the workstation into the domain, you can re-enable IP6 at that point. We'll go ahead and ignore the delegation error. That happens every time, just like it did on DC01. We'll click Next. We'll choose any domain controller because we only have the one. Choose all the defaults, click Next, and then we'll go ahead and click Install once we get that option. Looks good. Let's go ahead and click Install. And once again, when it's done, it will go ahead and restart, so we don't need to stick around to watch this. and we can go ahead and start working on our client. We'll also go in and make sure that our VMware tools are set to update automatically. And once we shut down the computer, we can also go ahead and add more memory and more processors. You see, the memory does allow you to add it while it's running, but what I found is it causes a lot of instability, so I don't recommend you do it while it's running. And when we're done, we'll just go ahead and click OK. We're in the VMware settings, and we're going to go into Client 01 settings, and we're going to do a similar thing that we did with the servers, except for we don't need 6 gigs. We could just easily get away with 4, or approximately 4, and then we'll go to processors, and we could either stay at 2 or go to 4. We've got a lot of different processor options. Let's go ahead and click OK. I'm going to leave this one at 2, and it's not going to be doing a whole lot, and we'll go ahead and boot back up, and we'll set the IP address, and we'll join this to the domain. Let's go ahead and log in. And we'll go down and we'll set our network IP address just like we did in the previous versions. Now, if you don't see when you click on the Network and Sharing Center the options that you want to see, you may end up going to the Start menu and clicking on Settings. Just depends on what version of Windows 10 you get. And you can click on Network and Internet. And from here, you can still click on Network and Sharing Center to get to the same place. So let's go ahead and click on Change Adapter Settings, and we'll go to Properties, and we'll once again go to TCP/IP4, and this time we'll put in a .3 address. And we don't need to go out to the internet. And we'll put .1 for DCL1 so we can join it to the domain. And if you do have trouble joining it to the domain, once again, we can disable IP version 6 just by unchecking that box. Go ahead and click OK. All right, so now we're back, and let's go ahead and choose Control Panel once again. And we'll choose by large icons. And we'll scroll down to where it says System. Now, in this particular case, we can go ahead and change the name of the computer and join it to the domain all in one time. We don't have to change the name, restart, come back, and join it like we did with our domain controllers. So let's go to the computer name. We'll call this Client 01, or whatever it is you'd like to call it. And we're going to join it to the widget llc.internal domain, which we set up on those 2 domain controllers. Go ahead and click OK. And we're getting prompted to log in. Now we can see here our domain is widget.llc.internal, so we don't have to put in widget.llc in the username if we don't want to, but we certainly can. It's already going to try to log into the domain. And when it's done, we should see Welcome to the domain. We do. Go ahead and click OK. And we can click OK again, and sometimes you do get the changing primary domain DNS error. This is a perfectly normal error. You can go ahead and click OK. You can ignore it. When it reboots, it will update that DNS information. And now we'll restart. After the restart, we'll click the Control-Alt-Delete button. And we're going to click on, let's go ahead and scroll down so you can see it, Other User. So instead of logging in locally, we're going to log into the domain. So we'll put in widget llc/administrator, because there is still a local administrator account on this particular computer. And we'll log in. And we see it's going through all the different setup phases. We'll just let that finish. Depending on the version that you're using, if you get the prompt to log in with a Microsoft login, choose to join the computer to the domain option instead, and then it'll allow you to log in as a local user. And you can create a local user as an administrator. You can call it anything that you want, and then you'll log in. Now, this is the enterprise version. It doesn't do that, but the professional version does. So once again, just choose the join this computer to a domain option, create any username you want, and it will automatically be an administrator. Once you join into the domain, you can log in, as we just did, to the widget llc.internal domain as the administrator. So let's right-click on our Start button, choose Command Prompt or PowerShell, whichever one it says. Let's make sure that we can ping DC01 and DC02. There's DC01, that's coming right up. And now let's ping DC02, also looking good. Now let's make sure that we can connect to the file shares on DC01. So we'll just open up the File Explorer, choose //, that's the Universal Naming Convention option, and choose DC01. Make sure you memorize UNC, Universal Naming Convention. You'll be using that a lot in your career. We'll hit Enter. And there it is. We see our two domain controller folders that are automatically created when we promote a server to be a domain controller. So as long as you see those, that means two things. It means DC01 is successfully a domain controller, but it also means that you can connect from the client into the domain controller itself. So let's switch back as we wrap this up to Active Directory users and computers. And let's go to where it says computers. And look at that, we see client 01, so we know that we were successful in joining that to the domain. Click on domain controllers, and look at that, we see DC01 and DC02, so those domain controllers are successfully added into Active Directory as well. We're going to want to do one more thing, and that is we're going to want to import some objects from a CSV file into our Active Directory. So you can drag and drop, copy and paste, or use the shared folder option in VMware in order to get the all good file from your host into your virtual machine. Now we've created this CSV file ourselves, so in order for you to get one of these, you'll need to look up some directions on how to do that if you don't already have a way to get a CSV file that has a lot of different objects in it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to move this CSV file into our C drive, but you can put it anywhere you want. It just makes it easier to do the import if we do it this way. So there's our all good CSV file, and now we're going to want to run a command, so we'll just go ahead and log in to a command prompt as administrator. And we're going to go ahead and go back to our C drive. So we'll do a CD // and now we're at the root of our C drive. Now we'll type CSVDE along with some switches, and we'll choose the -I-K-F C:\\allgood.csv. You don't even need the C:\/ because you're actually in the root of the drive, but we'll go ahead and put that in case you didn't put that in the root. Hit Enter, and we should see that all of our files have been added in. Now if you get an error, it's possible that you spelled widget llc.internal incorrectly, so the CSV file doesn't match your Active Directory. And if that's the case, then that would be a different issue. So let's go ahead and click on Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, and we should see a whole lot more stuff in here now. And there it is. We see all these new organizational units such as human resources, information technology, all these different things. So one of the things you're going to notice when you click on this is any of the objects that we imported, it has a little down arrow next to it. So we can easily fix that to enable it. Now you can't choose a group when you do this. Groups are not included because by default they're enabled. But you can choose all of the users and computers all at once by holding down the first one, then the Shift key, and then the last one. We'll right-click and we'll choose to enable account. And now they're all enabled. And you can go through each one of the different organizational units and do the same thing. Let's go ahead and sort by type. Let's choose this first group here. Again, do not choose the security groups because they won't work. And right-click and choose Enable Account. So for instance, if you accidentally choose the security groups along with the users, you right-click, you don't see the option to enable or disable, and that's because you added the security groups into your selection. So go through each one of these until you get through all these different ones and enable all of them, and then you'll be able to start using them as well. So again, don't select the security groups, and we'll choose Enable. And then all of your groups will be, all of your users and your computers will be enabled at that point. So that's how you can set up a lab, an Active Directory lab, using VMware Player Workstation. They actually combined the names for this particular free one. And again, we're not using this commercially. We're just using this for learning tools only. And once you have this set up, you can do all different kinds of experiments using the different tools, adding the different roles and features, and really learning how Active Directory works along with its workstations.